The dawn broke peach gold over Argent Spire, the tallest tower in Solace megacity. But Lysandra Quill was already awake on the tower's wind-swept rooftop. Her bare hands sifted through aeroponic moss as if it were ash from an old hearth. Down below, 800 stories of glass and alloy funneled commuters toward factories, pleasure domes, and habitat warrens. Yet up here she cultivated the last unruly thing the city allowed: soil. The beehive drones that ferried pollen between her planter trays paused in their choreographies, engines humming like curious cicadas. They were noticing the new arrivals too. 3 matte-back seeds, each the size of a baby's fist, lying in the moss like mute meteors. Lysandra had found them in an unmarked packet inside her delivery chute the night before, wedged between the usual allotment of spinach clones and radish starters. There was no sender's tag, no cryptographic stamp, just a single sentence printed in silver ink. Plant when you're ready to see the sky breathe again. Ordinarily, she would have run a gene scan. Mystery seeds were illegal in Solace ever since the Blight years. But something in the message stirred the ache she felt whenever she looked at the city's smog-banded horizon. She had come here 8 years ago, fleeing a desertified countryside, hoping to green the vertical world the way her grandmother had greened the horizontal one. Instead, she was paid in vouchers to grow microgreens for hyper-peasant restaurants. She rarely saw the people who ate them. So just before midnight, she pressed each seed into its own pot of moss, whispered an old farmer's prayer, wakeful, rise kind, and sealed them under grow lamps. Then she tried to sleep, preparing herself for another day of polite disappointment. At first light, the lamps lay shattered on the floor, wrapped in coils of impossible vine. The stems were thick as her thighs, armored in ridged jade. They had erupted through the ceiling vent, punching past rooftop railings. Wherever their tendrils touched alloy, the metal wasn't bent. It was cradled, almost caressed. Leaves the size of sails dripped a translucent dew that shimmered violet where the sun lanced through smog. The vines continued up, higher than her eyes could follow, vanishing into the dawn glare. That was when she realized the entire tower trembled. Not from wind, but from a living thing ascending faster than any elevator. Alarms chorused across rooftops. Security drones zipped like hornets. Argent Spire's building AI opened emergency channels with the city's Department of Structural Resilience. Lysandra remained on her knees, fingertips brushing the mossy pod that had birthed an impossible skyscraper of green. She wasn't sure if she wanted to laugh or kneel deeper in reverence. Matteo Serene rode a maglev capsule along the exterior track of Argent Spire, scanning the green lattice that now framed half the tower. As deputy director of urban continuity, he had seen collapses, fires, even a rogue nano-quarantine, but never anything that looked so beautiful. The vines hugged the superstructure like organic buttresses, their cambium layers interfacing with smart steel joints, distributing weight instead of stressing it. The blocks beneath him were actually relaxing, sensors reporting reduced sway. Potential, he thought, scribbling notes on his retinal HUD. But potential was just another word for hazard when you worked for the city. His brief was to evaluate and neutralize threats before politicians woke for brunch. Argent Spire housed 40,000 residents. One misjudged tendril could shatter transport tubes, snap power conduits, send debris raining onto pedestrians. His capsule docked by the rooftop where maintenance beacons flagged the origin point. The moment the hatch irised open, he smelled loam real, unsterilized loam, and something floral with a hint of ozone. He found Lysandra Quill perched on the rim of a planter tray, boots dangling over the city abyss, her dark hair whipped sideways by the wind generated from leaf draft. "You planted these?" he asked without preamble. She turned, eyes fierce as freshly sprung leaves, and they answered. Matteo toggled a drone cam to focus on a tendril thicker than his torso. "They're answering roughly 4 meters of vertical growth per minute." Lysandra smiled ruefully. "Faster while you were in the elevator. Are they engineered?" Symbio-augmented? Any provenance codes in their genome? I haven't sequenced them. Didn't have time. She held up a broken grow lamp. They were courtesy of an anonymous admirer. The admirer might incur several mega fines once the city clerk is done. Tell the clerk whoever sent them gave Solace its first fresh breath in a generation, she said, nodding toward the horizon. Matteo followed her gaze. The vines had already breached cloud level, their topmost leaves unfurling above the smog's brown lid. Their stomata would be inhaling pollutants by the ton, exhaling oxygen straight into the city's respiratory poverty. There, for the first time in months, sunlight knifed down through a gap the leaves tore in the smog, painting bridges and transit rails in shafts of honest gold. People on adjacent rooftops gasped, pointing phones, cheering. It looked like the city was erupting in a green celebration. His professional caution wavered. You realize the ordinance says any unregistered growth beyond 20 meters is subject to immediate incineration. I realize your ordinance was authored by people who think parsley counts as wilderness. You're passionate, he conceded. Passion is rarely a good metric for public safety. Give me 24 hours, she pleaded. Let me study them before anyone hacks them down. If they're dangerous, I'll hand you the axe myself. And if they're not dangerous, then we learn how to grow a city that finally forgives us. A drip of dew spattered Matteo's collar. It carried a scent like rain on hot copper, strangely soothing. He thought of the city's endless battle with carbon quotas, the billions spent on scrubbing towers that never quite clean the air. What if this gift could outperform those towers at a fraction of the cost? What if the vines could knit rooftops into a living canopy, cooling microclimates, shading transit walkways? His mind flickered with diagrams. All right, he said, surprising himself. 24 hours. But I stay with you, running tests. Lysandra's smile lit brighter than the dawn. They worked side by side while the city buzzed below, half terrified, half ecstatic. Sensors revealed the vine's interior tissues weren't cellulose alone. They contained carbon nanowire filaments, harvesting static energy, likely explaining the speed of growth. The leaves cultured microlichens that metabolized sulfur dioxide into harmless salts. Dew condensate proved potable. Even fruit pods formed, plum red and heart-shaped, dangling like lanterns along the stems. Matteo tasted one after Lysandra assured him her bees thought it delicious. The fruit exploded with sweetness and a curious effervescence that reminded him of childhood sodas. Nutrient density off the charts, he marveled, reading the scan. High B vitamins, complete protein. Lysandra wiped juice from her mouth with a laugh. Imagine a harvest every sunrise, just send a drone up the stalk. It could wipe out food deserts, Matteo breathed. Their excitement built an intimacy sharper than romance. The intimacy of shared purpose. They scaled scaffolds, collected tissue samples, mapped root networks. The vine's basal nodes had penetrated only 15 centimeters of rooftop concrete. Instead of cracking it, they secreted a bioadhesive that distributed stress like a gecko's foot. It was as if the organism had studied architecture and chosen the gentlest path. By dusk, the vines had grown into the stratosphere. Leaf discs fanning wider than helipads. Streetlights switched on early, blocked from the sky, but the vine canopy glowed with bioluminescent streaks, turning evening into an emerald aurora. News feeds christened the phenomenon Beanstalk Dawn, and trending polls showed 61% of citizens wanted the vines conserved. 23% wanted immediate removal. The rest just posted Vine memes. That second group was well funded. Steel conglomerates, energy suppliers, and, most notably, the pesticide cartel known as Cynthia Grow, whose lobbyists were already peppering the mayor's council with dire legal warnings. Matteo's comm implant buzzed. A holo of his boss, Director Wen, materialized at his shoulder. Her eyes were flanked by exhaustion lines carved through decades of crisis management. I gave you authority to secure the site, not chit-chat with rogue gardeners, she scolded. With respect, Director, we're observing an ecosystem service worth trillions in carbon credits. She pinched the bridge of her nose. Citicorp's insurers predict catastrophic liability if those vines snap in a storm. The planning board meets at dawn. They want a containment plan. Containment or demolition? There's no difference if you're holding the saw, one said, terminating the call. Matteo exhaled. Lissandro laid a hand on his forearm. They'll break them, won't they? Not if we give the board a better story than Cynthia grows. He glanced at the moonlit tubers. Something visionary, but plausibly safe. She cocked her head. You're an urbanist. Spin me a future. He paced, words sparking. Picture a network of controlled vines linking rooftop sky gardens, shaded promenades, organic vertical transit. Each stalk becomes a carbon sink, a food source, a cooling tower. We design bracing rigs to guide growth, harvest energy from sap flow, integrate sensors to shut off expansion past predetermined altitudes. You're talking about a living infrastructure, she murmured. Streets grown, not paved. And grown under license, he added. Give the council economic incentives, they'll sign. She studied his face. You sound like you believe it. I do. He looked back at her. Because I've seen what these vines did in one day after you believed enough to plant them. Something electric, tender passed between them, the promise of a different city, and perhaps a different loneliness, one that could be shared. The hearing convened on a sky bridge, flanked by glass walls with a panoramic view of the vine. 17 counselors in ivory suits sat behind a curved desk. The mayor hovered in augmented presence from a vacation island. Lysandra wore sun-bleached overalls, Matteo a formal charcoal jacket. Outside the bridge's superstructure, the vine's leaves rippled like a dragon's flank. Matteo began the presentation. He streamed real-time metrics, pollutant reduction, oxygen spikes, thermal moderation. He displayed cost comparisons between conventional scrubbing towers and vine maintenance. He introduced renderings of a future Solace Garland's Project Organic arcades, spanning the Skyline, turning the megacity into a vertical forest. Counselors tapped data pads. Some thrilled, others frowned at the risk columns. Cynthia Grove's lobby rep, a severe woman with silver pupils, hammered those numbers, insinuating bioterror vectors, property devaluation, and, of course, botanical congestion. Lysandra stepped forward. Her voice was grainy with dawns and wind. My grandmother used to sing to her seeds, she said. She said, every seed is a promise of forgiveness, from us to the earth, and from the earth to us. For decades, Solace has asked forgiveness from machines that swallow money and spit out half measures. Now the earth is offering us a full measure. The question is whether we're brave enough to accept. The chamber quieted, but the vote tallies on the hollow dais still sat precariously at 9 against, 6, 4, 2 undecided. Just then the bridge shuddered. An external siren wailed. All heads turned toward the glass. Cynthia Grove's security flyers, boxy and black, descended in chevron formation. Mechanical arms deployed tanks of herbicidal foam, prepping to drench the vine root nodes before a decision locked the city's hands. Counselors scrambled. The lobbyist feigned outrage, but didn't hide her smile. Once the vines were dead, debate would be moot. Lysandra sprinted for the maintenance hatch. Matteo caught her hand. Where are you going? To protect them. That's a military-grade sprayerless. Then come with me. They climbed the external service ladder while drones zipped around with lethal purpose. Lysandra's muscles burned, but fury fueled her. Matteo followed, punching an override code into his comm that sent a cease and desist to every drone pilot. Ignored, of course. On the rooftop, the first jet of herbicide struck a younger vine, sizzling holes through leaves. The plant convulsed, emitting a keening vibration felt through steel soles. Lysandra leapt onto the nearest tendril, gripping a ridged surface like climbing rope. Hold on, sweetheart. she whispered to the vine, feeling stupidity and certainty merge. She had no weapon, only her voice. Remembering her grandmother's songs, she began to hum a lilting minor key lullaby older than recorded memory. The vine's keening changed pitch, harmonizing. Tremors settled, leaves brightened, veins pulsing cobalt. Mateo's jaw dropped. Resonant response, he said. Their frequency sensitive. Help me amplify, she called. He patched her voice through the tower's external speakers. The melody expanded, a cathedral of human breath. Vines along adjacent rooftops vibrated in sympathy, passing the song like mycelial gossip. Tendrils flexed outward, interweaving into a green shield wall. When the drones fired again, the foam splattered uselessly against thickened cuticles, then dribbled away, neutralized by some excreted enzyme. Crowds below cheered. Cameras streamed the impromptu symphony of woman and plant. Officials on the Sky Bridge witnessed the city defending itself with music and biology, no tax levy required. The undecided councilors toggled their votes to yes. Seeing momentum shift, 2 of the no bloc defected. The mayor, ever attuned to polling winds, declared a historic partnership between Solace Megacity and the Beanstalk Bio Initiative. The drones retreated under threat of seizure. Lysandra stopped singing, throat raw. Mateo reached her, panting, exhilarated. He placed a hand on the bark that had become warm as living skin. Looks like we found the growth regulator, he smiled. Her eyes shimmered with tears, relief, and something brighter. And a song line for the city. Below, antique church bells, silent for decades, rang in impromptu celebration, their bronze tongues echoing the same frequency the vines favored. Car alarms howled in sympathetic resonance. A laugh rose up across neighborhoods. In that overlapping choir of human and plant, Lysandra and Mateo stood forehead to forehead, wind braiding their hair with vine filaments. They kissed, not as reward, not as ending, but as seed, a small beginning that knew with reckless certainty it could grow tall enough to brush the stars. Weeks later, Solace's Skyline was rewritten, guided by sonic beacons calibrated from Lysandra's original lullaby. Vines arched gracefully between towers, forming verdant sky bridges. Architects integrated root platforms into housing blocks, exchanging rent subsidies for oxygen credits. Children commuted to school across leaf-lined pathways where birds nested for the first time in living memory. Apartment air filters became obsolete. Lysandra headed the city arbory corps, training gardeners in melodic horticulture. Mateo oversaw structural harmonics, designing anchor rigs that doubled as public balconies. Together they walked inspection rounds at sunset, charting new growth, debating where to extend the next canopy. One evening, they reached the zenith of the oldest vine, now capped with a gazebo of woven branches. Far below, the city lights blinked like a fallen constellation, but up here, the stars lay within reach. Lysandra produced 3 jet-black seeds from her pocket. She had found them inside the latest fruit pod, a genetic echo. "Plant when you're ready to see the sky breathe again," she quoted, pressing one into Mateo's palm. He enclosed her hand with his, feeling its living warmth. "I think," he said, "the sky's just learning how to inhale. Wait until it sings." They planted the seeds together in a pot of moss, setting it at the tower's edge. Tomorrow the city might awake to new shoots, new questions, new fears. But tonight the air tasted of chlorophyll and possibility, and their love green fierce, uncontained promise to climb just as wildly, binding steel and heart in a forever blossoming embrace.